If you have a true scary story you want to send in to the channel, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. This was a summer a few years ago, where I used to work the night shift at a small burger place. It wasn't a big-name place like Burger King or McDonald's. It was a small, locally owned little shack kind of place. The kind that used to be all over, but are pretty much just retro bait at this point. It was just off the highway near my hometown, and it was kind of a cute little place. The crew was mostly just a bunch of high school and early college students that were looking to make some extra cash. Most of them were totally fine, but there were a couple that were a bit off. One in particular was this guy that worked there named Dave. Dave was in his late 20s or early 30s, was skinny and pale, and he had stringy hair that was cut in a bowl cut. He also had pretty clear issues with hygiene, and as much as I don't like to comment on people like that, his issues were very outwardly visible. His uniform was typically pretty stained, like he didn't wash it, and he definitely smelled bad. And the other coworkers tended to avoid him, and I genuinely felt kind of bad for him because of this, but it was difficult to stay near him too long in the back. Dave was also pretty quiet, sometimes too quiet. He would just shuffle around the back and do what he was told to do by the managers while mumbling to himself. I thought that maybe he was at least somewhat self-aware and he did realize that people didn't really spend time around him, so he was self-contained, if that makes sense. After a few weeks, though, I realized Dave's problems went beyond being an antisocial guy that smelled funny. I started catching him staring at me. Like, a lot. I wasn't a fan of that, but it was when I caught him staring at some of the other girls, specifically the two girls that worked there that had just turned 16. His stares didn't seem flirty, really. They looked predatory, like a stray dog staring at a pile of meat. That kind of creepy stare. There was one time when I caught him watching one girl, Michelle, who again had literally just turned 16 a couple weeks prior. She was having to bend down to get something from a low shelf, and he was damn near panting while watching her. He was wide-eyed, licking his chapped lips, and transfixed on her. For a few moments, I just kind of stood there like, does he not realize that I'm standing right beside him while he acts like this? But then he started to, I guess the correct word is grind, against one of the prep tables slightly. As soon as I saw that, I had to step in. I walked up behind him towards Michelle and told him that he needed to knock off being such a damn creep. I then grabbed Michelle and took her into the back room, and explained to her that she needed to talk to the manager about putting her anywhere that he could, away from Dave. I then told her what I saw, and she was seriously creeped out. I said that I would go with her to talk to the managers about it, but she said that she would be okay, that she would talk to the manager as soon as she could, and I told her that she could tell him to talk to me about it if she wanted. A couple of days later, I was taking the trash out, and I heard some rustling from behind the dumpster. I pulled open the gate, and there was Dave, crouched on the ground in the back corner, and eating a handful of French fries straight from a garbage bag. That's not an exaggeration. He was grabbing a fistful of fries from a bag that he had torn open, and he was eating them. I just stopped dead in my tracks and stared at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? He sort of laughed about it and just said, man, people are so wasteful, huh? I nodded, tossed my trash bag into the dumpster, and just turned to walk away, because I really didn't know how to process that situation. I ended up telling the manager about this because it was messed up. I knew for a fact that he wasn't homeless, and I knew he had a job. One where we could literally get free food. Why the hell was he crouching behind the dumpster and eating trash-covered French fries? The whole situation completely unfurled about 2 or so weeks after this. Yes, he was still employed there after being a creep to a teenager, and after eating dumpster fries. At the diner, we all had our own small lockers. They weren't much, but it was a nice touch for the employees. We could store our belongings in a locked box, so we knew they were closed and secured. Usually there weren't any problems with the lockers. We all had our own with our first names on them. We kept our purses or non-work clothes in them, and that was that. On this particular day, I had come in for my shift, and when I went to my locker, I noticed that something smelled rank. There was the smell of something rotting coming from the wall with the lockers. I didn't even put my stuff in mine. I went to the manager and told him that it smelled like something had died in one of the lockers. He followed me over to the wall, and when he finally smelled it, he nearly gagged. It was awful. Thankfully, we weren't busy yet. It was about an hour before the dinner rush, so he was able to call all the present employees over to ask them to unlock their lockers to see if there was something in them. At about the same time that we ruled out all the current employees that were there, Dave walked in the back door. The manager asked him to open his so he could see if there was a dead mouse or rat or something in it, because that's what we were all starting to think. A dead rodent had gotten in them. Dave says sure, walks over like nothing is happening, and opens his locker. And we figured out what the smell was. His locker was full of hamburgers, most of them half-eaten, some of them looking like they'd been chewed up and spit back out into the paper. I nearly puked when I saw this all. I don't know if anyone that will hear this knows what several weeks old, cooked, and then set in a locker ground beef looks or smells like, but it was disgusting. The manager looked as appalled as the rest of us, like he had no idea what to do here. He ended up telling Dave to clean his locker out and to meet him in his office when he was done. Dave just shrugged and did what he was told, and afterwards, he left like there was literally nothing happening. He was obviously let go. The manager said that when he asked about the food in the locker, he said that he kept them in the locker in case he wanted them later. And when he asked how old the burgers in there were, he said that the oldest one was around 18 days old. More than 2 weeks. I have no idea how the smell hadn't permeated prior. Maybe it was just a thing with it all compounding, but it was terrible. I have no idea what was wrong with Dave, but he was just weird. Creepy, even. If it was just something that was wrong mentally with him, with the food, then maybe it could have been worked through. But the fact that he was willing to perv out toward a 16-year-old girl, it wasn't even worth trying with him, in my opinion. I think he was just abnormal. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I don't work there anymore, obviously, and I never saw Dave after that. I have no idea what happened to him, and in the end, I don't know that I care enough to even think about it beyond retelling this story. In the mid-2000s, I worked at a call center. It was a warehouse building converted into a call center with thousands of square feet filled with cubicles. Back then, companies still had designated smoking areas. Ours was a fenced-in patio, and a large number of employees, including me at the time, smoked cigarettes. So there was this new guy that I would see who I started talking with on my smoke breaks. Dude had a rockabilly look with tattoo sleeves. It seemed like a really chill dude. We would chat about common interests and would probably have hung out at some point, but he disappeared suddenly. I found out later, through the gossip grapevine, that he was fired, supposedly for accessing adult content on his work computer. Kind of odd, as the cubicles at this place had low walls with no privacy. Anyone standing up could see your screen. But he was gone. A little while later, a coworker posted a bulletin on MySpace with a link to a news story. It was about the coworker who disappeared. Apparently he was divorced, and despite being in a new relationship, he couldn't get over his ex. So, he went to her apartment, cut a hole in the door with a chainsaw, and started shooting through the hole with an assault rifle. The dude killed his ex-wife's new boyfriend and shot her several times. She survived. However, she was pregnant and the unborn child did not. I remember my coworker friend having a hard time with this. She was apparently close with this dude and really empathized with his mental issues. While she didn't condone what he had done, she was disgusted how the prosecution asserted that he was faking his mental health issues. Anyway, this kind of messed with me for a bit, because the dude always seemed totally chill in our interactions. I always found it fun to BS with him, and even felt a little sad when he just stopped being around on my smoke breaks. I guess it just goes to show that you never really know what's going on with some people. I don't mean to start this story dramatically, but there is something universally unsettling about realizing a person you work with every day may have a darker side. My story centers around a man that I used to work with, whom I'm going to refer to as Marcus. That's not his name. In fact, I'm not using any real names in this story for several reasons. Marcus was my boss. He was a diligent man, albeit slightly eccentric. He worked as a head librarian above myself and a few other people in my hometown. And the whole time that I knew him, I honestly respected him and thought that he was a decent guy. I'm not a good judge of character, apparently. This whole thing started in my 3rd month of working at the library. I was still getting used to their stack system and how the library was formatted. The whole thing was kind of confusing, but I was getting there. My favorite part of working at the library was working with the kids that used it to do schoolwork and research. I guess I should add that this was the early 2000s, so before everyone and their brother had a smartphone and unfettered internet access. So when kids would come in to look for information on fossils or history projects, I loved helping them. At the time, I was considering becoming a teacher, but it just hadn't yet gone through the schooling, so this was a good experience. On that morning, Marcus was having me help him reorganize the archive section of the library, which was the small room in the very back of the library. It was its own separate room with a door near the rear exit. This was where old newspapers and periodicals were kept, if there are people out there that don't know the purpose of the archives. As we worked, Marcus and I were just chatting it up, and we somehow got on the topic of children. I think it's because I had mentioned wanting to be a teacher, and said that I loved working with kids. While I was talking about it, Marcus seemed kind of uncomfortable about the whole conversation. I could see his face, and without a better description, he looked like he had to go to the bathroom but was holding it in. I asked him if he was okay, and he laughed and said that he was. I said that he was looking a bit pale, and he mentioned that his stomach was hurting and he excused himself. I told him that I wouldn't go anywhere and just figured something was physically wrong with him. Now, there may be some red flags going up here, but at the time it was just weird behavior by someone I had worked with for 3 months. Odd, but nothing more than that. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later where things really happened. I had completely forgotten about that day. It was practically a non-event. It was a pretty normal day, really. Nothing was going on, and there were only a few kids in the library. Once again, Marcus and I were doing a bit more of the reorganization of the archives, which was a small project that we had been working on here and there. It wasn't really a critical project for us. While we were fixing things up, a girl walked into the room with a notebook in her arms. She looked to be around 11 years old or so. I had seen her in the library before a few times, so I wasn't surprised to see her, minus the strangeness of a kid being in the archive section. When she walked in, Marcus stopped doing what he was doing and walked over to her, asking if she needed help with something. The way they talked, it seemed like he knew her and she knew him. She was comfortable enough to talk to him about a project that she was working on for school. I actually remember the project, too. She was supposed to look up newspaper articles for her birthday from 20 years before she was born, and write up anything that happened that day in that year. It seemed like a pretty neat project, just to get kids associated with researching historical events and whatnot. She told Marcus what she needed to do, and I mentioned that I could help her while he did the reorg, if he wanted. But when I said that, I saw his face drop, almost like he was disappointed that I had said that. He then mentioned that he would help her, and walked over to one of the cabinets. After a few moments of them looking and me doing what I was doing, Marcus hollered over to me and asked me if I could go to the front to see if the front desk needed help with putting stuff away. It was a bit of an odd ask. They were well-staffed, and I didn't see any reason for me to do it, but he was my boss. And I just said, alright, and that I would be right back in a few moments. Again, at the time, it seemed like no big deal, but looking back, it was a strange thing for him to ask me to do at that exact moment. I went up to the front and talked to the clerk, asking if they had anything they needed help with. The two people up there kind of glanced around like they were seeing if there was any extra work, but they said that they had things under control. I said okay and decided to stop at the restroom really quick before going back, figuring I would take the moment to myself since he had sent me to the front. After I finished up there, I went back to the archive room to let Marcus know that they were all good up front, but when I got to the archive room, it was empty. No Marcus, no girl. The table in the center of the room still had her notebooks on it, with one of the older newspaper scans sitting on the table as well. For literally no reason, I immediately had a really bad feeling about this. I had no reason to suspect Marcus of doing anything, but my gut was telling me that he had. I stepped out of the archive room, and immediately, it got worse. The back door to the library has a bit of an issue with sticking. If you didn't push or pull it all the way shut, it wouldn't close. And I saw that the back door was cracked open, like it had been used and not shut properly. I pushed it open and looked out into the parking lot, just in time to see Marcus back out of his spot and pull out of the parking lot. Worse yet, I could see the girl he was talking to sitting in his back seat, looking scared and confused. I immediately ran back into the library and to the front desk, yelling that they needed to call 911 and that Marcus had just kidnapped a child. They both looked at me like I was insane, but I told them that there was a girl in the archives room before he sent me to the front earlier, and that I had just seen him pull away with her in his back seat. The older of the two librarians said that there was probably some sort of logical explanation, but the other one, a girl about my age, understood the gravity of the situation. She grabbed the phone and called 911, handing it to me and then saying that she was going to go check the security camera to see if she could see it happening. I explained to the dispatcher what had happened, telling her that my boss, Marcus, had potentially just kidnapped a young girl from the library, and that I saw him drive away with her in his car, and that she looked scared. I described his car, color, make, and model, and told them what I recalled of his license plate, which was just the first 3 numbers. They said that they would send the police there immediately and to lock the library down if possible. I'm sure that was just standard procedure, just in case, but they asked us to not let anyone else in, and to ask others to stay in the building. The cops showed up and asked me to talk with them about the situation, and mentioned that they had several officers on the lookout for his car in town, and that they would find him. I explained the whole thing to them as I knew it, and the other librarian showed them the footage, which was when I first saw it too. There, on grainy early 2000s security footage, was Marcus holding this girl's hand and leading her out of the room, and out the back door, only a couple of moments before I returned. This was obvious confirmation that he had kidnapped this girl, and that was likely why he had sent me away. He needed the opportunity. To wrap this story up, because I know it's gone on for a while, the bolo was successful, and they found his car. He was driving on the outskirts of town towards a highway, and they were able to get him stopped in a somewhat forceful manner. The girl was unharmed, but was obviously very scared, and very confused as to what was happening. He said that he was taking her home, but she told the officers that he said he was going to help her with her school project. She said that he had told her that what she was looking for was in a box in his car, and then that he had shoved her in the back seat, and took off as I walked out and saw it happen. He was arrested, and her parents were called to the library, which was another unfortunate part of the story. Her parents had dropped her off and said they would be back later, so she was there alone. This wasn't an uncommon thing, though. A lot of parents used to drop their kids off while they went to work, basically using the library as a free babysitter because it was, quote-unquote, safe enough. That stopped pretty much immediately, and the library implemented a rule that all children under 16 had to have an adult with them, because of this event. I don't have any proof of this, but I did hear of rumors that the police went through Marcus's apartment, and they found some rather disgusting things on his computer hard drive. Things I won't explain here, which tells me that he had very ill intent with that girl. In the end, I'm glad that she was unharmed because God only knows what could have happened to her had he not been stopped. I saw your request for Creepy CoWorker Stories, and I've been meaning to reach out to you for a long time because I probably literally have 100 stories I could tell you. I have a lot of weird experiences. So, I'm a nurse, and I started working at a hospital, and they were training me on the night shift with this guy named Jamarcus. That is so nice. So I was telling him all kinds of weird paranormal experiences I've had, and he was sitting across the table from me, and it was about 3 in the morning. I noticed he was getting tired and probably bored. His eyes were getting heavy, and he was about to doze off. As I sat across from him, my peripheral vision saw a portal in the corner of the ceiling. It was probably about 18 inches in diameter, and it was black speckles making up the circle. Anyway, I looked directly at it, and it was still there. So, I'm at a point talking and telling Jamarcus how I don't like to watch scary movies because I feel demons are attached to them, and you're kind of letting that into your house or space or whatever by it just being on the screen. All of a sudden, he pops his head up, and his face morphs into this creepy face. He literally kind of walks on his elbows across the table, gets up into my face, and in a demonic voice says, "Yeah, you don't like that you can't take it, can you?" And then he just kind of goes back and, melts back down asleep into his chair. I was like, what the hell? I worked with Jamarcus for 6 years after that, and he is so nice. I like him and I consider him a friend, and I never told him what happened. It's hard to even believe that something could have spoken through such a sweet guy. It kind of gives you some weird food for thought. Hey Raven, I just want to say first of all that I love your channel, and I love your storytelling abilities. I could listen to you all day. This is the first time I've ever submitted a story, so please bear with me. Thank you, Adam. This happened in the early 90s in Liverpool, United Kingdom. My sister, who was about 23 at the time, worked in one of those boutique shops within a shopping center. You know, one of those shops that sold everything from toiletries to furniture, toys to Christmas decorations. They also had smaller stores in there too, like a small shoe shop, a seasonal shop that sold Christmas trees at Christmas, fireworks on bonfire night, cards and seasonal gifts for Valentine's, Mother's and Father's Day, Easter, etc. She didn't really like the job. She was doing it for the extra money. She was also working full-time at a cinema in the evening and weekends, which she did really like. They had a little room downstairs where they would have their break. It wasn't much of a room. It was a table and chairs, like those wooden ones you get outside in a pub beer garden, but a little bit smaller, meaning you couldn't move the chairs as they were attached to the table. She would normally get a 15-minute break in the morning, and then an hour's lunch, and another 15 minutes in the afternoon. She always preferred to eat her lunch on her own because she gets very self-conscious with other people watching her eat. It stems back to growing up and always getting bullied for how she ate or making too much noise. And she noticed that the guy who worked in the shoe shop, let's call him Amir, started to time his breaks with hers. At first, it was just the last 5 or 10 minutes, which wasn't too bad, but then she would see him planning for his break when she was getting ready to go for hers. When she would get down to the break room, he would be sitting there. There didn't seem to be anything off with him. He was an older gentleman, maybe 50s and early 60s, and he was pleasant and friendly enough. Then, the inappropriate questions started. So are you single then? Would you date an older gentleman like me? She just smiled politely, trying not to be rude. The fact that he was possibly 50 years older than her, he obviously didn't see that as a problem. She remained polite, but tried to keep her distance as best as she could. She would go to the bakery in the shopping center for her lunch, or eat her sandwiches outside. Amir then started buying her chocolates and flowers with creepy notes like, "To my number one girl." One shift, he waited for her to go on her break, and then followed her downstairs. Instead of sitting on the bench opposite, he sat next to her, which meant that she had to move up to let him sit down. He put his hand on her arm and said, "Have you been avoiding me?" "No," she replied, her voice clearly shaking. He then rubbed her arm and said, "I was buying you nice things, and then you ignored me." She thought that she heard someone shout her name from upstairs. Well, if she didn't, she was going to make out like she did. She managed to squeeze past Amir and run upstairs. She went straight to the supervisor and told her everything that had gone on over the last weeks with Amir and his inappropriate behavior. The supervisor's response was even more shocking than Amir's behavior. She said, "Oh, that's just Amir. He does it to everyone. He won't be the first, and you won't be the last." It was then that she realized she could not stay there. He may have just been a harmless, lonely old man, but then again, he might have been something much, much darker. So that, my friends, was some creepy coworker stories about coworkers that are creepy. Most of them normal, one of them paranormal and genuinely terrifying. But all of them about coworkers that are or were involved in a situation that is creepy. Yeah. My thoughts on this. If you're working with somebody, okay, let me start this over. My thoughts on this. If you're a creep, 1, stop. 2, why would you be creepy with someone you work with? Now, the easy logical answer might be easy access to the person. But my brain says, why would you be creepy with someone in a situation where you are likely to lose your job? Like, your way of living. 1, you just shouldn't be creepy, because why would you? There's literally... There is literally no reason to be a creep like this. Like, if you have like an attraction to someone and you kind of like flirt with them or try to hit on them, I understand that. But if it's not reciprocated, just, I don't know, stop? Maybe? Who knows? The other part of that is, there's no point in being consistently creepy with anyone, much less someone who could go to your supervisor and say, hey, this guy's a creep, and then HR, has to file you the little slip saying, get the hell out of our building. My point is, stop being creeps. Just stop being creeps. It's that easy. You don't got to do this. One of these guys got arrested. That's dumb. All he had to do was not be a creep. I mean, there were other creep things outside of that story, though. At the end, they mentioned that they found illegal content on his hard drives, too. So, yeah, that's, he was beyond salvation in that situation. Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed, strong word, these creepy coworker stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as that helps tremendously. And you can also leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts, how you're doing, if you've ever had a creepy coworker, so forth and so on. You can also do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. You can join memberships or Patreon to get early access to content like this and other things, depending on how you sign up. And there is a merch store in the link down below. I advertised it in my last video, and at least one of you didn't like that. I guess sorry. I'm not, but, I don't typically push my merch. I'm trying to make a couple of sales. I make like $2 per sales. So, I mean, with all respect, it's not like it's, a huge funding situation or a funding opportunity for me. I just want people to have my merch because I love my merch. I wear my own merch frequently. So, I literally have an As the Raven Dreams wallet. My wallet is my merch, bruh. Anyways, hope you all have a beautiful day. Hope I do see you again here very soon, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.